Hi, my name is Reza Ganjavi and I'm here with two dear friends, William and Jessica.
Hello.
Hello. We're gonna talk about something tonight, but we don't know quite what, right? We decided to have a discussion and we decided to tape it, so if it's really good we can share it with the bigger world. So let's just ignore the camera and talk about whatever we feel is important to us. So where shall we start? Any subjects on anybody's mind which you like to bring up, and we can talk about it as three friends. We have time, we had a nice meal, it was vegetarian and organic. Philosophy meaning love of wisdom. I think you don't need to be a professor of philosophy to call yourself a philosopher. You can be just an ordinary human who is interested in truth, who wants to inquire and not just accept things because they're given to them. You understand?
Yeah.
So to question everything and find out whether it makes sense to himself or herself or not. And in this process, he or she tries to discover the truth of something. There's just a glory out there, you know what I mean? It's just so beautiful.
But just the night is beautiful too.
It's true.
It's just a different kind of beauty.
That's true. I didn't say the night isn't. But there's something about the morning glory which is really special.
Mm. It evolved from rap, and you know the Beastie Boys?
No, not rap.
Yes. It evolved from electronic music.
Electronic
and
music,
rap.
but not rap.
Well, there was.
Hardstyle has nothing to do with rap.
Okay, so what about school? Do you feel pressure in school?
Social pressure.
Social pressure, scholastic pressure.
Well, the social pressure, there's a lot of social pressure when you're at SEET, which is the intermediate school. It's like the summum of the social pressure. And otherwise, primary school is not really. It's like mostly making fun of each other, and then sometimes people just take it badly.
Mm-hmm.
But at college, it's like, well, it's the same as in the intermediate school, but more evolved, even though it's kind of, it is lesser, but people are much more like manipulating other people and like talking behind people's backs instead of like publicly saying, ha 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 ha, that person is this, that.
Interesting. So in grade school, elementary school, the kids are less inhibited, less complicated psychologically, so they just say ha ha ha.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. They just all lead up, and as soon as you find something that's gone wrong with someone, you can all say ha 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 ha.
Right, but in college, so-called college, it's more diplomatic, inhibited, more complicated.
Yeah, it goes a lot more around talking and doing things that pressure with words more than with
actions.
Actually mocking people.
Right. And you said the intermediate school. What do you call it? The middle school. Siedler. You said there was the culmination of pressure.
Yeah, definitely.
Can you talk a bit more about that? This is the age like 12, 13, 14? Or?
Yeah, you're going between 11 and 14.
Okay.
So.
Perfect age.
Yes.
In what sense?
Perfect age for social pressure.
I mean, all of these people are just going through adolescence, beginning of adolescence.
Yeah.
And they've all
it's the
huge hormone imbalances.
I see.
And then you put them all together in a school with all of the social pressures around them. It's not the fault of the kids themselves.
No, it's just that they're all together. They shouldn't
all
be
together. And they're all trying to deal with what it means to grow up and how they're supposed to behave in the society, and they've got all of those
Do you find that
happening around them. You know, like, it's not just the music, but the way the music is presented, you know, with the imagery and so on that they're trying to emulate.
Did you find that your kids were also difficult during that age?
Just a bit.
Okay.
No, they weren't difficult.
Only slightly.
Only slightly. They weren't difficult. They were having a difficult time.
Mm-hmm.
Both of them in a different way. It's awful. And I think it's worse than when we were young.
Can you add some color to this for me? Because I don't really quite get it. Can you help me understand a bit more? Just add some details or explain it a bit more, please. Maybe use some examples or just a little bit, if you can.
Well, to make it clear.
Yeah,
People
make it clear.
Yeah, people make groups, except in the normal social evolution, people just like kind of go from group to group because they have friends and contacts with different people.
Mm-hmm.
But in this, it's like they build a whole social structure, and everybody has to have their own place, which has to be the right one. And the problem is that there isn't a right place because it's a wrong structure. So
wow, you're a wise girl.
Thank you.
Okay.
So it means that people just make groups, but they make them completely arbitrarily, like
Cliques, right?
blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so they like associate with stupid things, like however they dress, what they do,
Right.
stupid things like that. And the less people think, and the more they're like crazily into the oh, I'm becoming an adolescent, and not just thinking about the whole thing, but just trying to get out of it without thinking. They just form into groups, and when I was there, we had les populaires, which were the ones who were the most
Popular ones.
Yeah, they were the most execrable ones, actually.
That's another
Execrable.
French word.
Execrable. Okay.
Unpleasant.
Yeah, but unpleasant to a
And they
terrible
were popular.
extent.
They were popular in the sense that they were the self-declared.
Yeah,
popular.
they were self-declared. They were
I
totally
understand.
self-declared.
I
But they
understand.
were popular. That part was true. But they weren't popular because they were cool. They were popular because they were awful.
I see.
And they were like kind of dictated a model of dress code and stupid words, like you had to have a certain expression because otherwise you weren't
Right.
cool, and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they like pressured on everyone else, and all the others just kind of made different groups that didn't make much sense because
Mhm.
they were just like trying to be with people that slightly resembled them, not because they actually liked them, but just because they couldn't be by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So the popular were mean to everyone else, and things that.
So if you don't conform to the way they expect you to behave, they make you feel awful.
Yes, they do,
But they,
unavoidably.
yes, they do their best to make you feel awful. But they also feel awful because they can't live up to their own standards.
Yes, exactly.
So everybody
They're probably
is.
the ones who feel the most awful.
Mm.
But they probably feel awful not only because they can't live up to their own standards, but because they
make
just
the
feel
other ones-
awful.
Mm.
And also because they make the other ones fail.
Yeah. So if you're trying to make other people feel awful, you will naturally feel awful yourself
Mm.
in some ways.
Yeah.
But this sounds so familiar. It sounds like we're talking about the story of mankind. Sounds like we're talking about traditions, because that's what traditions are, right? They want to make it conform to the way it has been.
Yeah.
And if you don't, if you're not that way, then they try to make you feel awful about it. So this is a very interesting subject because as humans, as free humans, wow, free humans, that's a big word, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, we can
Yeah.
talk about freedom. Let's talk about that, okay, after this one.
Okay.
Or now maybe. Let me just close this, yeah. So as free humans who can think for oneself, a human who can think for oneself, we ought to be able to stand alone, to think about what's best, what's the best action, what's the right action, and not have to be forced into a mold which is dictated to us, or at least question it and see, because some of it might make sense. I'm not saying tradition is wrong completely. Some things about traditions are good and healthy and intelligent, but certain things about it may not be. So it makes sense that we should question things at least and not just accept them.
Yes. I think there should be rules, but moral rules that you can, well, it's like ideal because it would never work, but it would be like if you can choose to acknowledge the rule or not.
Mm-hmm.
But it wouldn't make sense because if you could just ignore rules, then everyone would. But if there was some actual moral value, some actual thing that compelled you to respect those rules, then most of the time you would. But there would have to be something that would motivate you sufficiently to want to do what the rules tell you to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that would mean that you could avoid them when it's necessary and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And if you avoid them because you don't want to do them, then you learn why it's there and why it's bad to ignore the rule.
Mm-hmm. So there's what I've found is that it's really helpful to distinguish the practical areas of life from the psychological aspects of life. Practical things are like, making a living, having a place to live, the whole technological realm, how we made the train, how we went to the moon, and all the mechanical aspects of living. Mechanical, I'm not meaning it as a negative thing, but transportation, every day you come and go, this is kind of a mechanical thing. But nevertheless, there is another area of life which I like to use the word psychological, let's say. It's all that happens, we have our physical life, and then we have all those things that happen in our mind, let's say, in our psyche. So in this, when we're talking about roles, of course, in the practical sense, roles are important. Your father is a director, that's his role, right? You're a student, that's your role. At this stage in life, you're studying, for example. But psychologically, to come back to what we were talking about, in these cliques in schools, for example, you're supposed to have, you're supposed to be part of a clique. If you're cool, you're a part of this clique, that whole thing. And that whole realm belongs to this field of psychology that I'm talking about, and it involves images. Like, what does the other person think of me? What kind of image I'm going to portray by being a part of this clique, by wearing this kind of a clothing, by listening to this kind of music, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't it have a lot to do with images?
It does. But which ones?
So let's talk about images for a minute, because this is a very interesting subject. The challenge, let's get to the point, right? The challenge is, can we live without images? Psychologically, because practical field, your dad has to know where is his house. He has an image of where the house is so he can come here, you know what I mean? So there's images practically have a role, a proper role in life. But the challenge I like to give you, to us here, is can we live without any images, period? Now, these images include image of ourselves, image of other people's image of us, image of others, and so on. So let's not quickly say yes or no, okay?
Yeah.
Because this is a deep challenge. A challenge like this is something we can go and test it in our daily life. Because first we have to come upon the whole image making process. We have to understand what are images, how they're made, how they come into being. It's not something we just shut them off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if we go into images and what they're made out of, when I looked, I found out that they were made from thinking. So every time you have an image of somebody or yourself, you are thinking.
You
can
think
you can
to see
test
the
this
image,
out.
but the image is like an accumulation of all the things you've noticed.
Exactly.
All the things that are visible,
Right.
but on a certain point of view.
But that thought that I'm talking about is exactly as you say, is an accumulation. Is the outcome of the accumulation process, which is what? Memory. Right? We accumulate memory, then we build an image out of that memory that I am so and so, or this person has this image of me. So if you examine the movement of thinking, you'll see that it's based on memories, which is past experience. And even when you think about the future, your thoughts are still based on what you already experienced and what you already know. So they're bound within this field of the known.
I think it's like a tool for your memory and for your brain that uses images to summarize things so that it doesn't have to think for so long and so many details.
Brilliant. That's exactly it. And in the practical field, that's very important, isn't it? I mean, imagine, in computer science, your dad and I are both computer scientists. In computer science, algorithms are important. We write these libraries that we can use again and again and again.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you have to write it every time, it's going to be a lot of work. So our mind makes images because, just as you said, because it's efficient.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to go through that process again and again. But for the practical, that's all for the practical areas of life. Psychologically, this becomes a problem. Because you're dealing with somebody, for example, a person who is learning, who is moving, who is changing potentially. And yourself. But the image is always solid, is always still, static, right? So you're seeing something which is moving through the glasses of something which is static. So what happens is husband and wife might be married for 20, 30 years. They build images of it. If they build images of themselves, of each other, as many do, then they don't see the person exactly as the person is right there and then. They see it through all that they've heard and accumulated and hurts and you see? So then the relationship becomes kind of spoiled in some ways.
Yeah.
Now, to bring this back down to everyday life of us who are not married, the challenge also goes not only that we don't build images of other people, but we don't build an image of ourselves. And I found when I was your age, if somebody like me would have come as I'm telling you this, or suggesting, I'm not telling you, somebody would throw this challenge of, is it even possible to have no image? So many of my problems would have been solved. Because in this age, I had struggled with images. I was like, am I a child or am I an adult? And if I'm an adult, I'm supposed to behave this way. You know that whole transition between adolescence to adulthood. So, and later on, I just found so much freedom by not making any images of myself. Which means what? Let's be more practical so this is not just theory and boring. So if you're saying that images are thoughts, then lack of image or the end of imaging or the death of image making is when thinking is quiet. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense.
Great. Wonderful.
But if you think in silence, you don't keep any traces and you can lose things so quickly without even realizing.
Lose things?
Yeah. Like, think about something and never perceive it again.
Let's keep this here on the table, because I think this is important. Let me just say something else, but let's not lose sight of what you just said. When I say when thinking is quiet, it doesn't mean we're dead, right?
Yeah.
It means we can still see. I can still see. I can still hear. My senses are working. I could be walking down the road in the park or something. I can hear the birds. I'm walking. But inwardly, I'm completely quiet. Right?
Yeah.
I'm very alert. Anything which comes to my space, I will see it, perceive it. Even when a thought comes, yeah, okay, comes. I'm not going to push anything out. So what I'm suggesting doesn't have any element of suppression or, what were you saying about the camera?
Oppression.
Oppression. There is no oppression involved.
Yeah.
Which is a kind of a new idea from what I've read, because most of the books you pick up and read, they talk about forcing the mind to be quiet. because forever humanity has seen that to have a quiet mind is an important thing. Because if you're looking at a sunset and your mind is da 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 da, you don't even see the sunset, right? And most people think too much about things that they don't need to be thinking about. So we've seen it's really nice to have a quiet mind, but most people think of making it quiet, forcing it to be quiet. But the next question is, what about natural quietness? So that's a subject too we can talk about. But let's come back to this thing we have on the table, or anything else you'd like to say. Or William.
Where do I start?
Exactly.
You said a lot of things.
Yeah.
When I was an adolescent,
Speak up a bit.
When I was an adolescent,
He's a soft-spoken man.
Yeah.
It's a great quality, but for the camera,
so we both are.
it's true.
When I was an adolescent, I had an image of myself, and I couldn't break out from it, and so I actually had to move to a different city to get away from it, because you have this image, and all of the people around you have this image, and you have images of them, and you really want to get out of that to grow.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing I did. But how would we relate to each other if we don't have images? Because we need them. The first thing you do when you meet somebody new, in the first few seconds, is you create an image of them.
Images are bad, or that they're not necessary, but I'm just talking about psychological images, not practical images. So from a practical standpoint, yes, if I meet John Doe, he is African American, for example, living in Chicago, and he's an engineer, for example. So I retain these things in my memory. Naturally, I remember these things. So technically, you could argue that this is an image, but it's really recorded in the memory. So tomorrow when I meet him, oh, hi John Doe, and I know he's from Chicago and he's an engineer, for example. But and there's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is when I make psychological images. What's wrong is if a man comes in the room and I make a judgment about him based on the color of his skin, for example, or based on his name, or I'm talking about prejudice. This is a form of image. And there is something wrong with that. Take it from another angle about thinking itself. We're talking about activity of thought. Can thought not be active in areas and situations in life where we don't need to think about? Okay. So a lot of times those unnecessary thoughts turn out to be images. So we can talk about them in the sense of context of images, but we can just talk about it also in the context of things which we were thinking, which we shouldn't have been thinking about, because it's not what thought was made for. Because thinking is a tool, and it's made for the practical world, for the practical, mechanical, technical aspects of life, but not for relationship, not a lot of the certain aspects of relationship, because relationship also has a practical area, I mean, if you're married, there's a lot of practical things to this relationship. Who's going to take the kids to school and da 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 da. But I'm talking about more things like, does she really love me? Or a lot of things that goes on in our minds which are really unnecessary, and they do have to do with images and thinking about how other people think about us, which might not even be the case at all. It's usually just in our head, for example. And then it ends up to be confusing, because we're trying to apply a tool in an area which the tool wasn't even made for. So the other option is to just be quiet about it, and live it. Like they say, there's a saying that life is a mystery to be lived, not a problem to be solved. But since we were kids, this 5-year-old son of my friend, he had no problems. His brain doesn't deal with problems. His biggest problem is when the dog takes the ball and doesn't give it back to him.
Yeah.
And he sulks and goes away, and eventually the dog drops the ball and he gets it. But in a couple of years, he's going to go to first grade and second grade, and he's going to have to deal with geometry and mathematics and the whole thing, dealing with problems. and then his brain gets used to dealing with problems, and he grows up, and like, even when he doesn't have problems, he wants to make problems because he's used to solving problems. That's our educational system. Most of the emphasis is put on physics and chemistry and and very little bit on psychology, philosophy, music, arts, paintings, and so on. Or things which are not necessarily thought-dominated things, like arts. Or discussions about these topics, discussions about love, and about living a holistic life. Yeah? Not just becoming a good engineer, but to be able to have rich relationships, to be able to have enriching life. You know what I mean? To be happy. How many rich engineers do you know who are not rich inwardly? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You go to Paradeplatz in Zurich, the center of banking, you hardly see anybody smile. And most of them, their average salary is probably $1 million. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm maybe exaggerating, but not so much.
I have a question on which we were debating. Is money evil?
Is money evil? Okay. Let's just sit quietly for a minute, just to see if there is no leftovers from the last discussion. Then we come back to this in a minute, okay? And stuff makes us into a thinking machine. Not just our education, but our parents, our tradition makes us into a thinking machine through things like comparison and stuff. So we get a lot of practical things in our minds, the habits of wanting to solve problems, so making problems, and also noise. Noise such as comparison and things which are completely destructive, which kids go through their educational system. You know, compare this kid against the neighbor's kid. You know, he's smarter than you. He was more, you know what I mean? That whole
So
thing.
maybe one of the best things they could do in the middle school is teach people not to think.
That's also dangerous.
I mean,
because thinking is important.
yes, I know.
But
I
yes,
mean,
maybe.
to teach people that when they encounter problems, that your brain gets noisy and it gets more and more noisy, and it just becomes confusing and depressing. And that sometimes you can't solve a problem by thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And the best thing to do is to just try to make your mind go quiet and just stop going round and round in circles.
That's a good subject, a good idea. And one of the ways that I learned that really helps me is to write it. If I have problems, noise, I start writing it, and it gets dumped into the paper. In the process, I get to see it more clearly. Do you write, Jessica?
Not really.
Have you tried writing a diary? Like a journal? Like a daily? From time to time. Try it. It's a great age to start doing this. It's such a great thing, I tell you. You get a notebook or on the computer, and just every day just write a little bit about how you feel, about what happened that day, you know? And this has so many benefits. One benefit is that you empty yourself. Maybe it's not so easy in the beginning because you don't have the skills for writing yet, but it comes, you know, I don't know your skills, maybe you're a good writer, but most people are not good writers. Most people need practice. So just to freelance, free flow writing is not so easy. But once you do it after a month or something, you just start writing or typing and it comes. Whatever you're feeling, boom, empties itself out. Anyway, this is just a suggestion. It's a good way to empty yourself, and emptying is important. Because when we're talking about a quiet mind, right? We were talking about the beauty of a quiet mind. Because a quiet mind, when you're really quiet inside, you can really see the sunset and really enjoy it. You can really see the person as they are right there. You can really listen. Because if you have noise going on, you don't even hear things. So we're talking about the beauty of having a quiet mind. And it's a quiet mind is not something which can be brought about by an act of will or effort. I think you mentioned effort earlier. But it's something that comes naturally as a result of, or as a consequence of having order. Order not just in the outer life, but also inwardly. But if we're like full of ideas, I mean, I'm not saying ideas are bad, but if we're very busy inwardly and there's no order, things are a bit messy, then it helps. Like if your room is a mess, sometimes it helps to just empty it. You know what I mean? Maybe it's not a good example, but so writing allows me to empty myself, to see what happens. Also, it's another good thing about it is that it improves your writing skills, which is a great skill to have for everything in life. Whether you're writing a complaint letter to the airline, or you're writing to the CEO, or writing a report to your boss or something, good writing skills really helps.
Is money evil?
Is money evil? Okay, let's talk about it. The question is money evil?
Of course not.
It's necessary, right?
Money
In this
is-
day and age, you have to have
It's
money.
necessary, but it doesn't mean that it's bad. That it's not bad.
So it's necessary, but it doesn't mean that it's not bad. That's what
It's necessary because we made it necessary.
Well, look, before money becomes necessary, we used to barter,
Yeah.
right? And at some point, humanity said, we don't want to barter anymore, I'll turn my sheep into these little things, and you turn your bread into these little things, and then if you want to buy something else from somebody, you just use these little things. So that's how money came about.
But money is supposed to be a tool, and people use it so subjectively. Like, I want to be rich, I want to be really, really rich, and then I'll be happy. And I
No,
want money
that's,
because, well, yeah, that's it's
But that's a
exaggerated,
different
but-
question, though. It's
but-
not.
Yeah, but if you like, it accords so much value to having money, even if you don't actually want to be rich, or even if you don't actually want such and such thing, you just you just give it so much value. It's like money does this, money does that, and you need that, and then if you've got that much money, you can do this and that fabulous things. But money's what? Some paper, some little notes, and some coins and some numbers.
What do you think, William?
Money isn't good or evil.
Money just is.
Money's neutral. It's people's attitudes. You know, some people think that money has some intrinsic value, and if they have more of it, they'll be happier, and other people don't.
It is not neutral, because if it was neutral, anything neutral is something you can like decide what you think about it, because it's not going to influence you in saying I'm good because blah 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 blah, and there's so many things that prove it. But money is evil because it makes you think that it's good, because it's like you can have such and such and so many beautiful things with money, but
But Jessica, maybe we're going wrongly about the whole subject, because the answer is in the question. So your first question was, is money evil? And it seemed like it's not really a live question, because you already knew the answer. It wasn't something for us to explore. You already knew the answer, and it was, yes, it's evil, because da da da. But later you said something more things, which made me think maybe the question is not really about good and evil. Because the whole question of good and evil is like a black and white thinking. Like your dad said, maybe it's not black, maybe it's not white, because nature is full of other colors. For example, it's just some food for thought. Because we have two parts to our brain, right and left. The planet is north and south pole. We know man and woman, so we are used to thinking in duality. But maybe life is not just duality, maybe there's other options. Okay, but that's just something. But I think the other question that you're asking, which is even more important than this question of black and white, is what is the right place of money in life? Okay, perhaps I'm just,
not the one that we give to it.
or is it okay to give too much importance to money? Because, or does money bring happiness? That's another question.
Exactly, it doesn't, because you're like you're obliged to respect your money. You're obliged to want it in some way. You can't just completely ignore it and think, well, I think that's not cool, so I just don't want it. You're obliged to live with money.
No, wait, look, who is obliging you? Just some,
society.
yes, but
you
hang on.
can't live apart from it.
But this is very important. I think this is more important than many other things that are going on right now I know there's a TV show happening and this and that. But this is a very important subject. This is related to what we were talking about earlier, about peer pressure in schools, about tradition, and so on and so forth. So what you're saying is a great example. Society, tradition, whatever you want to call it, says money should have a very important role in life, right? So this is a form of pressure, isn't it? That's what you just said.
Yeah.
So how do we react to these kinds of pressures? Can we stand alone? That's the point. That's the point I was trying to make also when we were talking about the school. Can a student be brave enough, strong enough, clear enough to maybe not even belong to any cliques out of the desire to fulfill some image or psychological insufficiency, for example? Can a human, or maybe you're saying it's too difficult in a school situation. Okay, what about in daily life? Can we stand alone? Can we recognize those pressures? That we are being influenced by society to get a big job, to make lots of money, and that money is happiness. But can we not bow for that? Can we not be influenced by that or try to live by that? You understand what I mean?
We can try to escape it, but I mean, if we try to escape it, it will always catch back on us unless we find somewhere where society has not been yet, but somewhere where you can subside by yourself. Because I mean, if on a practical point of view, if you just run away from society, you have to abandon anything that has been colonized by human beings, which means that the only places where you can actually go is the ocean, the North Pole, or the forest.
Hold your horses for a moment.
Slow down.
Just slow down. Just 1 second, because we're not talking. Let's figure out one thing first before we go to the next. So we're not talking about
Can I try something?
Sure.
So one of the things I have noticed in my life
In my life.
is that money is taking over more and more parts of life, and I'm wondering if that's what you're thinking about.
Yes.
Because if I think about the way people used to live 100 years ago, they didn't need money for a lot of things, because people, for example, in many countries would grow their own food. They'd have their own garden and they'd grow their own food, and it was normal for people to have chickens so they could have eggs to eat, and if they wanted something done, they might exchange work with their neighbours to help to fix a fence or something like that, and then they would do something else in return. But now,
Nice life. Huh?
yeah, well, yes and no.
In some ways, yeah.
In some ways.
What's wrong with it?
In some ways, yeah. But now it's almost impossible to do anything without paying somebody to do it. Like it's impossible because we live here in an apartment. We can't grow our own food, so we have to buy everything.
You can't have chickens here?
No, it's illegal. It's illegal. We can't have chickens. We can't make our own eggs.
Okay.
So there is almost nothing in life which
That's interesting.
which you can't, which hasn't become monetarized or become part of the economy. So maybe it's something like that we're thinking about. But there's almost
Yes, but
nothing.
Money is unrating everything.
Yeah, but this is important. But also to come back to what you were saying about escaping. So the first question was, we're getting pressure from the society to believe that money is all important, that money brings happiness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we see that this is not very intelligent. We see that as a human, we cannot. I don't want to bow to this. I don't want to conform to this. But what do? You said we can escape. One option is to escape. You're saying escaping from the society and the whole monetary system. But before we take off on that, let's find out if it's possible to not be put under that pressure. The pressure is there. So we're talking about escape as one option, but another option is to really understand it. If you really see that you are being influenced, then this brings its own freedom from the influence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Then you
It
can be
doesn't-
in the
it doesn't
society.
help you. If you
Then you can
weigh
be in
up
the
you-
society, but not of the society. You understand what I mean? You can be in the society, but not have that pressure. You don't take that pressure. I'm just simply not going to take that pressure. I take that off my shoulder, and I'm still in the society.
But
Does that make sense?
completely, it doesn't change anything.
It changes a lot of things because then I'm not unhappy because if I don't have enough money. Because most people who bow to that pressure, conforms to that pressure, then for them, they've accepted that happiness comes with money. Then they're into that whole rat race of
But
trying to find.
even if you're not unhappy having few money, I mean, for example, if the economical system is not going very well, and you work but you don't earn enough money,
Mm-hmm.
you're still happy even though you don't have enough money, but you don't have enough money, so you have like a horrible life, whereas for you should be wealthy enough since you gave the effort and you're not asking for anything more than just subsistence. But you're still not happy because you just,
You don't have money for a vacation to.
not because you don't have the money, but because your level of life is too low because of the money.
But honey, this is not so much of an issue. The bigger issue is people who actually have a lot of money and they're dead unhappy. Because they found the money which they thought will make them happy, but they find out, oh, it's not bringing me happiness. So what do? They want more money because they think more money will make them happy. I mean, we see this all the time, right? Does it make sense?
Yes, but
So let's be pragmatic. Sorry, go ahead.
if they want the money, they're already corrupted by it.
What, louder, please?
If they want the money, they're already corrupted by it. If you don't want the money, you're obliged to have some form of pressure, because even if you don't want it, even if you don't like it, you still have to use it.
But
You
look,
still have to have the consequences.
look, we have to be practical in life, okay? These ideas of to not be in the monetary system is not practical. So as much as intellectually it might be interesting, okay, but we should just be practical and think efficiently and think clearly. So part of being in this life, part of being in this world, is to be very practical about certain things. It happens that we're in the 21st century. We're not in the 16th century anymore. We don't have chickens in this apartment. That's just a fact. So let's be practical and not waste time thinking about what if I don't want to have any money, how can I? Yes, I mean it's possible, not here, it's too cold here. But it's possible and it's respectable in some countries, some regions, to not have any money. In fact, some traditions actually nurture this, and it's fine. It's not, to be a beggar is not a disrespectful job in certain countries and traditions. So you could live with nothing, you could sleep on the street, and all of those things. But that's not our cup of tea here, right? That's not our life. Our life, we are in a society where, let's be practical about it. You see what I mean? So let's forget about these ideas of, the answer is in moderation, the answer is in practicality. We need to earn enough money to have a comfortable life, but money should not become an all-important thing, all-important focus of our lives. Right?
Yeah.
Simple. What about drugs?
What about?
What do you think of drugs? Because what happens with a lot of kids, a lot of youngsters, one of the big influences is not just society saying you should have a lot of money, it's also society, peer pressure and so on saying to be happy, not just money, but you need drugs. So, and this is wrong.
Does society say that? Does society say that?
Well, I think don't they? I mean, you're hanging around 16-year-olds. Do you have friends who smoke pot, for example?
Yeah, that's not the question.
Okay, but the thing is, like talking about drugs, there are some drugs which are very destructive, right?
Mm-hmm.
They can make you go crazy. There's other drugs which are actually medicines, like marijuana is a medicine, right? Certain respiratory diseases, it helps with certain cancers, with bearing the pain and this and that. But like any medicine, you use it regularly. Especially when you're not sick, when you don't need it, it becomes a problem. And what's the problem with marijuana? Tell me. You have any idea? First problem is motivation. Because you smoke a joint and you find happiness, however superficial it might be. You don't want to go do something to improve your life to find that happiness, right? Motivation issues. Marijuana is a psychedelic drug. it's classified as a psychedelic drug. Drugs are 3 groups: stimulants, depressants, and psychedelics. So it makes you think and see things which don't exist. So it's not very good in that sense. I mean, I much prefer to play the guitar and find my joy this way than just smoke a joint and see some things which don't exist, which I might find interesting. For example, you see what I mean? So daily life can actually provide a lot of joy. I was talking with a friend who saw a video by, what was the name of the guy?
Oliver Sacks.
Yeah,
Mm.
not sex, but socks. Oliver Sacks. Oliver Sacks. And he said something very interesting. Can you tell
Well, we
us?
saw it together.
You saw it together.
Mm.
But it was a very interesting, very simple idea, but very profound. And what he said, the way I understood it is, what was the terms he was using?
Oh, I can't remember.
What he was saying is that,
yeah, he was talking about his experiences with drugs,
Yeah.
with LSD and amphetamines and other things, and he said that that it has a chemical effect in your brain and it triggers the same pleasure chemical reaction, but without any content.
content,
Mm.
without content. Because when you
Do you
go,
get it?
do you understand what that means, right?
Yes, I
Like
do.
when I'm playing guitar, after about half an hour of going, I'm like full of joy. It's so much fun. You see, that's the content which brings joy. Or if you go for a walk, or if you smell a beautiful flower, all of these things which are bring joy to you. When you do drugs, it's from inside. It triggers certain receptors in your brain, which actually make you feel good because it increases endorphin secretion and so on and so forth. Without the content, which is not so interesting, right? Because then you become dependent on that drug. That's the third or fourth thing I was going to come to, is dependence. Because even if a drug is not addictive, psychologically a person can become addicted to it, which means dependence. So what's dependence? Talking about freedom. Dependence is the ending of freedom, right? When you depend, you don't have freedom because you're dependent on that thing, whether it's chemical.
It's also subjective.
Sorry,
It's also subjective.
what is subjective?
Dependency. You can depend on something, and, like, because you have the habit and because your body wants it, but you can just depend on it because you want to have it, and just suddenly stop wanting it.
Mm. Like with cigarettes, yeah?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
I stopped smoking because I wanted to. and
Good
because I
job.
wanted to.
But you know, you're a
We
minority.
both did that.
Yeah.
Good job.
One day I
Mm.
just said, well, I will. So,
That's fantastic. That's brilliant. That's beautiful. So, because most people can't do that. 95% of smokers who want to smoke, who want to stop, and they're very clear that they want to stop, they don't stop because they can't. And it's not just because of the physiological dependence, but it's because of the psychological dependence,
Mm.
which is actually not that difficult at all. But it's difficult for them because they don't see it. So seeing is another subject. Maybe next time we talk, we can talk about the art of seeing. Because when you see something, then some changes can come. But you have to see it very clearly. So you saw it very clearly. Without judging it, without fighting it, right?
I always saw it from the start. But
But you still smoked.
it's like I wanted to smoke it.
You wanted to smoke, right? It makes sense.
Because you want it because you're dependent, but also because you actually want it. Even though every precise time you want to, you smoke. You smoke because you're dependent, but you want to smoke in general.
Because it fits the image, because of many other factors, right? Exactly. We're not talking about that. We're talking about depending psychologically. Can we be really free from any kind of a dependence? Just something to ponder about. Can we be free from fear? Can we live a life without any fear? I mean, it should be possible, right? I mean, you know what I mean? These are big questions, that things to ponder.
It depends how extended the freedom is. Because, like I was saying before, I mean, was still free because I wanted to smoke, but the free choice implies that the consequence is not freedom. That kind of makes sense.
I see what you mean. So what you're saying is that you chose to smoke. You knew if you start smoking, you will be dependent.
You
Yes.
choose to become
You
dependent.
chose to to become dependent.
Yes, but by
Okay.
choosing to become dependent, you want to do it. So
Yeah.
since you want it, it's not so much dependency, it's just will, but
So
you
since you-
still need it. So
Since you've made that choice, then you can make another choice.
exactly, because you chose to start, you can also choose to stop. I mean, and because you can choose to stop, you've still got part of the freedom, but you just don't have it so long as you do it.
But you're an exception, you see, because for most people it's not like that. For most people, they start smoking because their friend says, "Here, take a hit of this cigarette." Before you know it, 2-3 hits, you're finished. So, and then it becomes very, very hard. I talk to so many smokers, and so many smokers want to stop, but they just don't do it, and they can't do it. So, you're an exception. That's great, and it shows you have insight. You're intelligent, so you can live a free life. So really question any form of dependence you may have, because freedom is great. Physiologically also, because when we're talking about smoking pot or anything, it takes away your health, and health directly affects happiness. Because when your body is really healthy, then you're really happy. You can be happy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And also when you're happy, you get lucky.
Do you?
I think so. There's like they say, happy-go-lucky, right? There's
Yeah.
that saying, but healthy goes happy goes lucky. And smoking brings bad luck actually, because you bring in all this negativity into your system. Every puff, whether it's marijuana or cigarettes, every puff brings 4,000 different kinds of poisons or something like this. And so you become susceptible to negative influences, but this is a bit more, not esoteric, but mystical. It's like Ayurveda theory. But I think it's true actually. So the best thing is to be really healthy, take care of the body, not think too much about areas you don't need to think about. Writing is really good. And yeah, life is good.
Yeah.
And voila. The German homework is good too.
Yeah, it is.
What is it?
German homework.
German Hamburg?
Homework.
Homework. You have to do German homework.
Yeah.
Good luck.
That's a very interesting psychological case.
Well, you know, in Switzerland they have one of the highest suicide rates in the world, and it's one of the richest countries in the world.
Yeah.
So you can clearly see the money. And you go to southern India, the guy is selling chestnuts. His whole life and possessions, everything he has is just that.
Yeah.
And he's got this beautiful smile.